89.3 and 88.5 Yes FM. Also broadcasting on the internet at yeshome.com and on your smartphone through TuneIn Radio and Wonder Radio.
Coming up next week, a big day where you can be an influence on the culture, and that is the Day of Dialogue that is happening April 18th. And on the phone from Focus on the Family, we have Candy Cushman. Good afternoon, Candy.
Hi, good to be with you.
Oh, hey, thanks for joining us this afternoon to talk about this. Now, before we talk about Day of Dialogue, the day after, the next day, April 19th, is a day that we need to be aware of. And in past years, not all schools have participated in this, but certainly need to be aware of. And Day of Dialogue is something to kind of interact and counteract that, is the Day of Silence. Candy, can you tell us about what the Day of Silence is?
Yeah, well, this event is actually in thousands of schools across the nation, so it's probably in a lot of schools there in your state. And what it is it's sponsored by one of the nation's largest homosexual activist groups called GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. And what they do is rally students to, on this day, basically take a vow of silence as their way of proclaiming solidarity with the gay rights movement, and also of just the way they describe it is just remembering the victims of bias against homosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender individuals. And on the surface, that does sound really nice and compassionate, but if you look at a lot of the materials that they give students participating in this, it can get pretty radical and really create a pressure cooker situation for students of faith, for Christian students. For example, students that participate in the Day of Silence have been encouraged to lobby for things like a, quote, queer-friendly prom. Teachers are encouraged to put out materials about homosexuality and transgenderism in the classrooms and to discuss the Day of Silence with students. So how do you navigate that if you're a Christian student? We hear from students that are concerned because they want to show that they're against bullying and they have compassion for people that are being hurt and vulnerable, but they also really want to remain true to God's word in their life and that they've chosen to live by God's word for their relationships.
Yes. Now, with the Day of Silence, what are some of the key things that students would need to be prepared for, and what can they do to maybe avoid that day, or just what's to counter that if they're going to school on that day and that's happening at their school?
Well, I think the great thing about the event that Focus is sponsoring for students the Day of Dialogue, which is happening the day before the Day of Silence on Thursday, April 18th. The great thing about the Day of Dialogue is that it's a positive way to respond because it's all about conversations and dialogue. Rather than silence, we're emphasizing that students can have dialogue, honest conversations with each other, that no one has to remain silent. Different viewpoints should be allowed to be expressed, including faith-based ones.
And how do kids, though, counter that, though? I mean, obviously they're dialoguing and stuff like that, but, I mean, what would you suggest to kids, who may be saying, hey, this is where I stand on it, I don't believe in homosexual marriage, and this is my stance on it, and yet you've got somebody else countering them who's saying, you're full of baloney, your faith is full of baloney. What would you do to encourage them to really hold their ground without, getting into an argument that's maybe, considered useless or, mudslinging going on?
Right. Well, first of all, we really encourage students to really reflect the Spirit of Christ in all their interactions and to demonstrate Christ's love, not to engage in, angry confrontations. We encourage them, if someone becomes angry with you or is rude, it's important that you remain respectful and loving, but at the same time, you can remain confident and have a spiritual boldness that, first of all, you have a constitutional right to express in a loving and peaceful manner what you believe, and that you can remain confident that you have a right to share your biblical beliefs. So we encourage them that way, and then we give them free speech tools to help them get the conversation started. Like we have free downloadable conversation cards on the website, and what the card does is just help them start the conversation by just introducing the idea: what if there's a God and He cares about every single student in this school, and He actually cares about the details of our relationships and our lives? How's that going to impact us? So, you don't have to barge right in there with a confrontation. You can just ask a question. Hey, what if there's a God and He actually cares about our relationships and He has something about the best plan for us? Can we just talk about what if that's true?
Excellent. And if people wanted to download that, the students wanted to download that, get those resources, where could they go to find that online?
It's on dayofdialogue.com, and on the side of the website you'll see lots of free resources like posters, T-shirt designs, and these conversation cards that I was talking about.
And I see that you have also some information for parents so they can be prepared, and for pastors as well.
Right, and I will just add something for students when they're responding to challenges. That you can also start off by finding the common ground, like that we can all agree that no one should be harmed or hurt for any reason, regardless of how they identify. We can agree that there should be real, true tolerance for different points of view. No one should be censored or have to check their beliefs at the schoolhouse door just because they're not considered politically correct. So I think you can start off with bringing up some common ground and then say, well, I've thought a lot about this, and I'd like you to just consider what I believe.
And that is dayofdialogue.com, where they can find out all of this information. And there, too, like after April 18th, after April 19th, the conversation obviously is going to continue just by how things are going in the culture. A lot of the information that you provide at your website, is that something they can just use any day?
Absolutely. We've got lots of articles geared toward teens about, there's a lot of talk in our culture about identity. How do we have a healthy identity? What is that based on? How to have healthy relationships. Why does it matter? Why do male and female matter? There's all these discussions about gender. So there's lots of teen-friendly articles on there, as well as conversation starter questions related to those articles that they can, even bring up in a Bible study group or at lunch or something like that.
I'm glad that you brought up like a Bible study group or idea. Do you guys have anything on there or anything accessible that would maybe help in discipling kids out there who maybe, are not terribly familiar with what the Bible has to say on, that kind of a topic or any topic for that matter, leading into that kind of a lifestyle or anything like that? Is there discipleship that goes along with this, or do you guys have resources for that?
Well, I think we have what's called Dig Deeper resources on there, where a lot of those articles and discussion questions are on there that I mentioned. I think that those are good for discipleship. But we also have lots of explanations of how the gospel message, how what Christ has done for us fits into all of this. There's a section called A Day of Dialogue's Guiding Principles that is a really good place to start. And then we have a fun stuff section that has videos, and there's testimonies, young people that have experienced homosexuality and walked out of it with God's help, and they just share from their perspective. So, and there's even stories about bullying, being bullied and overcoming that. And so, there's lots of things on there that could be used with youth that aren't as familiar with these concepts.
We're talking with Candy Cushman. She is the director of the Day of Dialogue, which is happening April 18th. Again, you can find out more information at dayofdialogue.com. And if students out there want to do something at their school to counter this and do something for the Day of Dialogue, again, what's the first step they need to take?
Well, the first thing they should do is go to dayofdialogue.com and look for that big box at the top that says Register Today. It's at the right-hand corner at the top, and just click on that and register for the event. And then you'll find a Get Started section that will lead you through things you can do to prepare for the event, like putting up the posters and handing out the cards. And we have a contest that they can still enter. The deadline is this Friday, April 12th. But there's a contest. It's really easy to enter, and you can win free wristbands, Day of Dialogue wristbands. They come in orange and blue for your friends or your student group.
Right. And in a nutshell, if students step up and say, hey, I'm going to do this Day of Dialogue, what's kind of in a nutshell, like, how should they be prepared just kind of mentally for what's going to happen that day?
Sure. Well, we do have, I mentioned we have a Get Started section, and in that section we do have a link to tips for responding to challenges. So I would suggest they just go through that Get Started section and read through our responding to challenges. It kind of gives them some ideas on how they might be able to respond in a loving way to different interactions they're going to have. We also even have tips for if they get challenged by a school official that says, oh, this is too religious, you can't put up your poster. Well, we have tips on how to respond to that, and we even have a hotline number to call one of the nation's largest Christian legal groups that is defending Day of Dialogue students for free if their rights are deemed to have been violated on this day. So all those resources are available.
Again, Candy Cushman with Focus on the Family and director of the Day of Dialogue. Again, you can find out more new information at dayofdialogue.com. Now, you mentioned a deadline. That's the deadline for like a contest?
Contest to win free wristbands for your friends or your student group.
But is there a deadline to get signed up to participate?
Well, just before the event, because
Okay.
everyone's doing it on April 18th. So, you could probably sign up even the day before, but you want to allow, I would say, at least 3 or 4 days in advance, because some schools have policies for putting up posters and things like that. So you want to try to be respectful and follow their policy as much as possible.
Okay. And then finally, any tips that you could give students to how they should act or respond on April 19th, the Day of Silence, if it happens at their school?
That's a great question. I think just the overall thing to remember is that our website challenges students to just have this mindset of reflecting the model of Christ, because in the Bible we see that Christ, he didn't back away from reaching out to people that were hurting and vulnerable. We see this in a million different examples, whether it was the woman at the well or the woman that was about to be stoned to death. He reaches out to those people that were unpopular and hurting in the culture, and he defends them. But at the same time, he never backs away from truth, from God's truth. And you see this great combination in Jesus Christ of love and truth, and that's what we encourage them to reflect. So I think they could respond by making it clear that, we agree no one should be harmed by bullying. As Christians, we believe that Jesus Christ came to give his life for us and everyone in the school, and so because we believe that, we should be the first to stand up against bullying. But for me personally, I choose to follow the Bible about relationships and sexuality. Would you mind if I talk to you about that? I mean, that they can just have very loving, respectful conversations that way. The conversation doesn't have to stop on the Day of Dialogue on April 18th.
All right. Well, Candy Cushman, director of the Day of Dialogue, thanks for providing us with some resources to handle that day and to do it certainly in a Christ-like manner, because it's definitely a hot issue now in our culture and something we need to be prepared for, but remembering to do it in love. So thank you for doing this and helping us all to be better prepared.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting your audience know about it.
Our pleasure. Again, dayofdialogue.com. Candy, thanks for talking with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.
Yes, FM.